evaluation methods, including interviews, surveys, and focus groups. We will also explore usability inspection methods, in particular, the Heuristic Evaluation method. By the end of this unit, students will be able to 1. Convey the importance of usability in relation to health information technologies. 2. List and describe usability evaluation methods. 3. When confronted with a particular situation and set of goals, determine which usability evaluation method would be most appropriate and effective. We've introduced and discussed the concept of usability in various lectures. It reflects the quality of a user's experience when interacting with a product or system. Does the system enhance or impede the user's experience? There are a wide range of factors that influence the user's experience, and this is just a partial subset. This list covers different dimensions of experience. Most health technologies will involve some sort of learning curve, and some systems are better at providing resources for learning than others. This is what we refer to as the learnability of the system. Clinical information systems can more or less effectively support cognitive tasks, such as finding patients' glucose values from last month. A certain numbers of errors in task performance are inevitable. But an unintuitive system that imposes a high memory load on users are likely to increase the rate of errors. Aesthetics and subjective satisfaction are very personal dimensions. But then again, we are talking about a user's experience, which is inherently subjective. I don't think we need to make a case at this point for usability evaluation, but there is certainly one to be made on both the clinical side and on the patient side. At least 40% of clinical information systems are either abandoned or fail to meet minimum requirements of use. As I understand, this is a rather conservative estimate. The Healthcare Information and Management System Society, which is better known as HIMSS, consider poor usability of clinical information systems as possibly the single most important factor hindering adoption. Usability problems are not only associated with poor system adoption, but a lack of efficiency and productivity, and even problems associated with patient safety and medical error. One may expect that clinical information systems that are difficult to use would be associated with user fatigue, frustration, and higher error rates. This is known to be the case. There is a similar story to be told in terms of patients and health consumers. There are a growing number of high-quality e-health interventions, and they offer significant promise to bridge the digital divide, reach out to users who are normally disenfranchised by such systems. However, problems associated with usability and inadequate design is likely to present significant problems for this population. These problems disproportionately affect lower computer literacy users. Similarly, patients suffering from chronic illness and older adults have special needs, and they are also more susceptible to usability problems. The net effect of such interventions could be to further exacerbate the digital divide and possibly even increase health disparities. That would be a very unfortunate and ironic turn of events. Today, we will be reviewing a few of these different usability evaluation methods. Ethnographic observations refer to observing users in the real world as they perform computing tasks. Controlled cognitive experiments may be employed to investigate how a given system impacts or transforms human performance. These are conducted in laboratory settings. This is another way to represent usability evaluation methods. It is convenient to think of 5 superordinate classes, or types of methods, and they can be further subdivided into a range of methods. We are going to talk about the first 4 classes of methods, namely interviews, questionnaires, usability inspection, and usability testing. It is convenient to group interviews into 4 main types. Unstructured interviews are most useful early on in the design cycle, where you have many degrees of freedom and still trying to understand the user requirements. It is less of a usability evaluation method and more of a method that is better suited for requirements engineering. Structured interviews are similar in structure to questionnaires or surveys. One would approach the interview with a very specific agenda and a set of predetermined questions. The interviewer would ask closed questions that present the interviewee with a very small set of response alternatives. This method is most useful when goals are clearly understood. Semi-structured interviews are probably the most widely used interview method and the most useful. They enable one to collect data that will answer specific questions, but also allow sufficient latitude to explore new ideas and allow the interviewee to voice their thoughts on a wider range of issues. Focus groups or group interviews are different from other interviews in important respects. I suppose you can debate whether it is appropriate to categorize them as interviews. Really, it comes down to convenience and economy of groupings. We will return to focus groups shortly. I want to mention that all interviews, or just about all interviews, are audio recorded and usually transcribed. It's useful to structure an interview into phases. The first part is an introductory phase, followed by a warm-up session in which relatively simple questions are asked. This may include demographic information. The bulk of the interview or the main session consists of a set of questions that are presented in a logical sequence. If the interview is semi-structured, you would normally ask the pre-planned questions first to make sure that they are properly covered, and then leave some time for more probing and explanatory questions. It is a good idea to wind down the interview and clearly signal to the subject that it will be coming to an end in short order. This was a usability study of older adults using a telemedicine system. I refers to the interviewer, and P refers to the patient. It's a useful convention to divide a page into two columns, with a transcript on the left-hand side and notes or observations on the right-hand side of the page. It is also a good idea to timestamp a transcript, which is not in evidence on this transcript. That simply means that you note the elapsed time every 30 seconds or so. It serves to index the recording and also gives structure to the transcript. Focus groups are a method that continues to grow in popularity. The method is commonly used in marketing and social science research. A focus group consists of 3 to 10 participants and a trained facilitator. The participants should be representative of the population in question. For example, if you plan to introduce a new clinical system that will be used by various physicians, nurses, and other hospital personnel, then an effort should be made to include them. In terms of topics, focus groups tend to resemble a semi-structured interview in that they are driven by an agenda but allow sufficient flexibility for people to express themselves. It's important that the facilitator not lose sight of the agenda, as tends to happen from time to time. It is also important to solicit contributions from everyone, including those who are more reluctant to speak up. It may happen that 1 or 2 verbose and highly opinionated individuals come to dominate the conversation in a focus group. Loud, boisterous, or strongly opinionated participants may serve to suppress participation, as others may be reluctant to challenge him or her. The role of the facilitator is to see that the discussion is balanced and that multiple voices are heard. Questionnaire/surveys are a common method for collecting user demographic data and soliciting opinions. The great advantage is that you can reach a relatively large group of people and ask very specific questions. Questions are typically closed, though open comments may be solicited. Likert items are a useful way to measure opinions, attitudes, and beliefs on a continuum. The scale is often 5 or 7 points, but 9 is not unheard of either. They are often used for evaluating user satisfaction. This statement represents a range of opinions. The expectation is that you rate your agreement with a statement such as, "I found the system to be easy to use," on a continuum from one extreme, for example, highest or strongest agreement, to another, lowest or strongest disagreement. This is a simple illustration of usability Likert questions. Responses are represented on a 5-point scale, with every point having a verbal label as a value attached to them. Semantic differential rating scales are an alternative to Likert questions. It is convenient and effective only when a question can be expressed in terms of antonym or polar opposites. Semantic differential ratings are less common than Likert questions. Online surveys are fast and convenient ways to reach a large base of people. They fall into two categories: web-based and email-based. Increasingly, web-based is the way to go. These systems afford a range of interactivity, which gives you more flexibility in how you ask your questions. Email-based surveys are more or less electronic versions of paper surveys, and one's options are rather limited. Another huge advantage of web-based surveys is that the responses are written to a database. That makes it very easy to collect and analyze your data. SurveyMonkey, www.surveymonkey.com, is one of the most popular sites. It enables you to create and publish online surveys in a short period of time and view results graphically and in real time. The image on the slide illustrates the different ways in which questions can be constructed. It shows two kinds of interactivity. The checkboxes in question 2 allow one to make multiple selections, and the radio buttons in questions 3 and 4 forces the user to select a single response. You can custom tailor the surveys using logic and conditional branching. For example, one may choose to present users who have experience using a particular health website with a different question set than those who are relatively new to the site. We are going to switch gears and spend a moment talking about a class of usability evaluation methods known as usability inspection methods. The two best-known UI methods are the cognitive walkthrough and heuristic evaluation, and we will discuss each of them in some detail. UI methods are used for examining user interface. They don't involve end users or subjects. Rather, they rely on the expert judgment of analysts. They are a cost-effective method and can be used throughout the design cycle. You can even use these methods with design mock-ups. Heuristic evaluation is a method developed by Nielsen and Malik. It is a relatively popular method and can be learned without too much difficulty. Of course, it takes some experience to refine one's judgment to the expert level. The method provides you with a set of principles to note violations of usability principles. The evaluation is independently performed by 3 to 5 analysts, who can aggregate their scores. In a second pass, analysts rate the severity of problems that they observed from inconsequential to catastrophic. The heuristic evaluation method is applied to one display or screen at a time. This is different from a cognitive walkthrough, which is task or scenario-based. A task typically involves transitions across several screens. In addition, the heuristic evaluation would involve a more comprehensive inspection of elements on the screen. On the other hand, a cognitive walkthrough may ignore screen features that do not impact task performance. Nielsen articulated a set of very general and broadly applicable heuristics. We have discussed these principles previously. Visibility of system status refers to how easily one can determine the state of the system at a given moment in time. For example, if you just clicked on a link on a web page and it's taking a long time to load, you should be able to tell whether the server is slow or overloaded or whether the page is no longer accessible. In most cases, you simply don't know what is going on. Match between system and the real world suggests that the system should speak the user's language using words, phrases, and concepts familiar to the user rather than system-oriented speak. It should also follow real-world conventions. For example, you expect a button to be pressed and a scroll bar to slide up and down, to take a very simple case. Minimizing memory load suggests that a user should not have to memorize complex command sequences to use an application. A system that provides multiple clues in text or icons to guide the user will diminish memory load. When memory load is reduced, A user can devote more of their energy to the task at hand. This is very important when clinicians are interacting with clinical information systems. Their energy should be devoted to tasks and activities that facilitate patient care, rather than having to negotiate the vagaries of a clunky system. Errors are inevitable, but a good system should allow a user to recover from an error without the risk of disastrous consequences, such as loss of data. Consistency in standards refers to the fact that a system should adhere to widely acceptable standards, and that there should be a measure of consistency across all displays and modules within a given system. Finally, an application that is engaging and pleasurable to use will likely be more widely adopted than one that is not. There have been several efforts to make Nielsen's heuristic more specific or tailored to a particular context. The heuristics proposed by Gerhardt-Powals is focused on judging a system in terms of how much energy expenditure is necessary to perform a set of tasks. For example, judgments are made about automating repetitive tasks. Gerhardt-Powals also suggested heuristics for grouping items effectively to reduce search, and minimizing cognitive load by aggregating lower-level data into summaries. Incidentally, there are several ongoing efforts to introduce summaries to aggregate patient data in electronic health records. This can save unnecessary search time for sifting through different electronic documents, for example lab reports, to find the information of interest. This is an example of a heuristic evaluation scoring sheet. P refers to a problem, and S is a proposed solution, which is a useful but not essential part of this evaluation process. As displayed in the right-hand column, the analyst notes which heuristic or principle is violated. For example, the analyst noted that the help feature is not sufficiently informative and context-sensitive. A proposed solution would be to introduce more in the way of context-sensitive guidance. The problem severity scale was developed by Nielsen to be used with the heuristic evaluation, but it is an excellent tool that can be used with any usability evaluation method. Rating the severity of problems is a very important step in usability analysis. The severity is a combination of 3 factors. 1. Frequency with which a problem occurs. 2. Impact of the problem, and 3. Problem persistence. Does it quickly go away, or is the problem a constant irritant? The rating scale ranges from a cosmetic problem that is not going to be prioritized to a usability catastrophe. The latter needs to be fixed immediately because it could cause clinicians immense frustration and having to endure much wasted time, and at worst, it can compromise patient safety. In summary, we discussed why usability matters in both clinical contexts and health consumer contexts. We then introduced several usability evaluation methods, including interviews, focus groups, and surveys. We also discussed a widely used usability inspection methods, the heuristic evaluation. What's next? We will introduce a second usability inspection method, the cognitive walkthrough, and then we will discuss the methods associated with usability testing in some detail.